Hey, today we're going to talk about 4.2, soil formation and erosion. So before we begin, you can check out the Enduring Understanding, look at the learning objective, pause the video, review the essential knowledge, and set up your Cornell notes. So there is a lot of information in this video, and this is probably going to be relatively new for everybody, and there's going to be some information in here that you've never heard, so yeah, dedicate a little bit more attention and time to this video. So what is soil? Soil is basically composed of 4 different components, and some of them you might be familiar with, some of them you might be like, really, that's in soil? The first one, soil is actually 25% air, and this is literally the spaces between the soil particles, and it allows for gas exchange in the plant's roots. Just like there is air in the soil, there is also water. So 25% of the soil is made up of groundwater, and the groundwater is basically water sticking to the little soil particles. It's residing in the spaces between the particles, and it allows for water uptake by the plant's roots. So groundwater is just the layer underground that another word for it is aquifers. We'll talk about those in the future, but basically it just holds water between the spaces in the soil particles. 5% of it is organic, and this word right here, it's pretty much going to be humus. This is humus, not hummus. Hummus is made from chickpeas typically, and hummus is a dip that is from the Middle East. This is not hummus. Hummus has 2 M's, this has 1 M. Humus is decomposed biomass, and it can be rotting leaves, dead animals, animal waste, etc. Excuse me. And it also, the soil, a part of the 5% that's organic is also living organisms. You may have plants in there, you may have bacteria, fungi, invertebrates, animals burrowing in the soil like are part of the soil. So all of these contribute to the 5% of the organic matter. And finally, 45% of it is minerals. Now we have particles within the soil, and they are made up of sand, silt, and clay, and we'll talk more about those in video for 4.3. But also we have nutrients that are present in the soil, like ammonium, NH4+, we have phosphate, PO4 with the 3-, that's a little charge, and NO3. Okay, and 45% of the soil is the mineral components. And the mineral components are typically the soil particles, which can be sand, silt, or clay. And they're the same basic type of particle, they're just different sizes, and we will talk about those in video 4.3. But also we have nutrients present in the soil. Ammonium, NH4, we have phosphates, PO4, and nitrate, NO3, and these little symbols represent the charges. There's a -3 charge on the phosphate. Do you have to know that? No. Do you have to know that nitrate's negative? No, not necessarily. But one thing I will tell you is that these soil particles, clay is typically negatively charged, so negative soil particles will not hold on to these negative ions. They may hold on to the positive ions, and we'll talk more about that later. So soil has many functions. For starters, it is a substrate for plants. It gives the plants something to hold on to so they can grow upright, but will also deliver nutrients like NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and also magnesium, aluminum, other nutrients that a plant may need. Soil also acts to filter the water. It can trap the pollutants in the pores of the soil. It can also trap them and redirect them into the plant's roots. So instead of the water running off somewhere that is polluted that can affect humans, the plants can absorb it, or the soil can absorb it and keep it away from humans. It also permits nutrient cycling. So with the cycles we talked about, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, whatnot, it can also return the nutrient components back to the soil through the process of decomposition. It also provides a habitat for all these microscopic and smaller animals. We have micro or macroinvertebrates like earthworms, insect larvae. You have insects, maybe cockroaches, crickets, fungi, bacteria, burrowing mammals like moles or shrews, rats, mice. You can also have birds living down there as well. So it provides a habitat for all of these different organisms. So how is soil formed? For starters, it can be formed from physical weathering. And physical weathering literally just means breaking a rock apart physically. So the freeze-thaw cycle, if there's a little tiny indentation in the soil and you get some water in there, and that water freezes, it will crack open that rock. Another thing is, if a plant can grow in a crack in a rock, this is a tree that's growing out of a rock right here. This is a plant that's growing in a little crack. This looks like bricks, but it's the same concept. But basically the roots themselves will push the rock apart, and the growth of the roots is actually stronger than the rocks, so it will be the first step in breaking that apart. Another thing that can happen is you can have chemical weathering. Chemical weathering, if you have flowing water, just the action of like water flowing isn't necessarily, you might think it's physical, but it's actually chemical, because there is chemical components to the water, and there is slight chemical reactions that are occurring. Now granted, wind and water can also be physical weathering, because there may be abrasive substances in there, like sand particles that are basically grinding down the rocks, like sandpaper. That can also be physical weathering, don't get me wrong, but there is a chemical component to the flowing of water. Also, you have lichens, which we talked about before. Lichens are it's the symbiotic relationship between the fungi and the algae, and they can release acids, and those acids can in turn chemically break down the rocks into smaller portions. And also we can have anthropogenic sources, and I don't really know if we've used this word that many times, but anthropogenic just means from a human. So anthropogenic sources, especially acid rain, that is definitely something that is caused by humans. In fact, this statue was made of limestone, and limestone is a base, calcium carbonate, and when it's mixed with acid rain, the acid rain can start to dissolve the calcium carbonate. Okay, let's talk about weathering versus erosion, because both of these are necessary in order to form soil in order for soil formation to occur. But you got to break it apart first, and then you got to move it somewhere else. That's what these basically mean. So weathering is simply just breaking the rock apart, and then it's broken up into smaller pieces, and eventually it is so small that it can be transported by wind or by water. And when that happens, this is part of the erosion, is the transport portion of erosion. And then finally, it can't just transport, because then it's going to be continuously moving somewhere. Eventually you got to drop it off. And this dropping off of the soil is called deposition. So weathering and erosion are both involved in soil formation. In fact, it starts with weathering, then it's erosion, which consists of transport and deposition. So the first thing that happens, and we discussed this briefly during the ecological succession topic, but you'll have parent material, which is the bedrock, and the bedrock is basically part of the crust. And the bedrock can have lichen growing on it, and remember, the lichen can chemically break down the rocks into smaller portions, and eventually you're going to have some of this partially weathered rock that is partially weathered from the lichen. This is a little bit exaggerated, not necessarily going to be that weathered just from the lichen, but then you'll form moss on top of it. And then eventually, after you get more and more organic buildup, you're going to have a layer of topsoil, you're going to have a layer of grass or whatever the living plants are, and you're going to have an organic layer, and then underneath the topsoil you will have subsoil. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about this in a moment. So from above, you first have to have decomposition. The decomposition is going to be contributing the humus. Again, the humus is that organic layer that is formed from either decomposing materials or any sort of other organic matter. And you can also have, from above, you can also have erosion and deposition from another source. So you may have like smaller rock components that are now broken up into microscopic components that are now adding layers to that soil. From below, we have weathering, and the weathering can provide minerals that are present in the soil, the sand, the silt, and the clay. So there are factors that are affecting soil formation. One major factor, and this is the most important thing, if you have soils that come from limestone, they're going to have a higher pH. Limestone, remember, is basic, so the pH is above 7. And if you have soils that originate from limestone, it's going to be better equipped for agriculture. Whatever the parent material, because you're getting some of the minerals from the parent material below, whatever that parent material is going to contribute to the quality of the soil. So if you had calcium carbonate parent material, you're going to have agriculturally pristine topsoil. So the better the parent material, the better the source material, the better the soil. So the soil is broken up into layers, and these are called horizons. Now, we've kind of talked about these in the other slides, but these are the letters, and it seems a little weird. Start with O. O is easy. It's organic. It's the humus. It's the very top layer. It's where you're going to have the dead leaves. You're going to have like worm poop. You're going to have decomposing waste, whatever. The A horizon is the topsoil. And this is where you have organic and mineral materials. And this is where most of your biological activity will be occurring. This is where your decomposition will be occurring. This is where your macroinvertebrates will be burrowing. This is where your plants will be growing. And then all of this, at all times, you're going to have water infiltrating down. Remember the hydrologic cycle? Water infiltration is water moving down into the aquifers or the groundwater. And as they move down, they're grabbing with it these nutrients, they're grabbing with it molecules and ions. And these ions get dropped off. These minerals, these ions, they get dropped off in this horizon right here. And it's called the E horizon because of this word, eluviation. Who cares about eluviation? The word is leaching. And what leaching means is like if I put, let's say I put some coffee beans, like I didn't grind the coffee beans, and I just put coffee beans in water. Eventually, some of that coffee is going to leach out. Basically, it's going to be pulled out of the coffee bean and mixed in with the water. So leaching is very much like that. As water moves through something, it pulls with it anything that's able to dissolve in it and be pulled away. So these nutrients or these minerals accumulate in this E horizon. E horizon is going to be different sizes in different soils, and different soils are going to be found in different biomes. And this zone of eluviation may be present. If it is present, it's always going to be after the A horizon, but it's not always present in all soils. But if it is, again, it's after the A. So that's a little curveball because otherwise it kind of go A, B, C, but then you got that E. So you just have to remember that. The B horizon is just subsoil. You're going to have mineral components in there. Literally the only thing that they ask you on the AP exam is they're going to ask you which one is called subsoil, and that's B. And the C horizon most resembles a parent material, and the R horizon is bedrock. Now this is misleading because in some sources, the C horizon, they also call it the bedrock. So the bottom layer is the parent material. The very bottom layer is the bedrock. Bedrock, parent material, pretty much synonymous. What I have included here is every single example that I can find, but there might be times where they don't use R. Okay? If you have any specific questions, obviously you know where to find me. So plants help prevent erosion, and they also help to purify water. This is the most important things that plants do. Well, they provide oxygen. Okay, maybe that's a little bit more important, but they prevent erosion and purify the water. I always say staplers and sponges. They act as a stapler because they hold the soil in place. They act as a sponge because they soak up extra water. That is the major benefit that plants provide. So how can soils become degraded? Well, you can have nutrient depletion, you can have a loss of topsoil, and you can have a loss of soil porosity or a decrease in soil porosity. And porosity just means how many pores are present. So there's pores in the soil, and that allows water and air to move through the soil. So nutrient depletion is caused when plants remove too many nutrients, obviously. The NPKs, which are the big ones, and you might have sodium, magnesium, and other micronutrients. And that can be caused from humans from repeated crop usage or crop growing. So increased amounts of agriculture, every single year is going to remove all of these nutrients, and it's going to lead to nutrient depletion, which can then lower future crop production, and that impacts humans. Topsoil can be lost because of erosion, and that can be caused from tilling. And tilling, you'll see this word, maybe you have seen it before, but tilling is just breaking up the soil. I can use a hoe, I can use a rake, I can use machinery, I can drag a plow behind a horse or a tractor, and I'm breaking up the soil. What I am doing is I am aerating the soil, but I'm also breaking up any sort of roots, any sort of other plants or fungi or anything in the soil there's networks of organic activity that's happening down there. And every time that I break up the soil, I'm messing that up a little bit. And I'm also loosening it up and making it more prone to erosion, because if it rains or it's really windy right after you till a field, you're going to lose a good portion of that topsoil. When that happens, the soil biota or the living materials or the living organisms in the soil are going to be decreased. You're not going to have as much bacteria. You may rid yourself of a lot of beneficial fungi. That can lead to nutrient depletion, which then can lower crop production. But also when you lose the topsoil, you're losing that water holding capacity. The topsoil has a lot of organic material, and that organic material holds onto water and keeps that water from running off, but it also holds that water and makes it available for plants in the future. And that, when you lower the water holding capacity, you can lower plant growth, which then can increase erosion even more. It's kind of weird. You're increasing erosion, resulting in increased erosion. That's bad. The soil porosity decrease can be caused by soil compaction, pushing the soil down. Why is that happening? Because you're using heavy machinery. You're driving a 10-ton tractor on top of soil. It's going to push it down. If you have cows trampling on top of the soil, they're going to push it down. So that's livestock grazing. Cows constantly walking over it, pushing down the soil. When the soil porosity is decreased, it doesn't hold as much water. And this erosion, like I said before, can continuously lead to more topsoil loss. And that's an example of a positive feedback loop. When you have increased erosion, you're reducing the growth of your plants because they don't have as many nutrients, as much substrate, as much organic material. Plants are not going to grow. You get less root structure. In other words, the plants aren't holding the soil in place. You get more erosion. As you get more erosion, you get more reduced plant growth. This is a cycle. A positive feedback loop is when something happens and then something else continues to happen as a result. A negative feedback loop is when something occurs and then a process will stop or be limited. We do more positive feedback loops in AP Environmental Science, so you'll be seeing a lot more examples of positive feedback loops. Okay, so one way we can test the impact of soil erosion is by testing water quality. And I'll talk about a few water quality tests. This represents a river. We have the main branch of the river. At letter A, we have a town, and this is a tributary, a smaller branch that flows into the river. So the river is flowing right through this town. We have another river at letter B. This is flowing by a farm, so it may pick up some of that stuff from the farm. And then we have a factory or some industrial area at location C, which also drains into the river. And then we have a dam at spot D, and the dam is basically blocking the river. Now you can use this for recreation, for irrigation, for electricity generation, all of which we will talk about in the future. And then the river continues on. So at level A, one of the water quality tests, or at spot A, one of the water quality tests is we would test for turbidity to see if there's increased runoff. Because we have surfaces in the city that are not soil, we have we have pavement, we have we have buildings, we have asphalt, we have sidewalks, concrete, all of this stuff that is not porous, it's impervious, so the water does not flow down and recharge the groundwater. It does not flow down, it will flow out, it will be runoff. That is, again, because of these non-porous surfaces, and that can actually reduce the water quality. So all of this, materials that comes from the city can cause the water to be a lot more cloudy. And remember, turbidity is the level of cloudiness or a measure of the water clarity. So water that is highly turbid is really mucky and dirty. So at location B, we have a farmland, and we can test for turbidity and eutrophication. And typically what we would do is we would test upstream at the red dot, and we would test downstream at the blue dot. Theoretically, it should be better water quality tests at the red dot, and worse water quality tests at the blue dot. What we're testing for is soil erosion. That's how we're testing for the turbidity. If there is erosion present, there's going to be a lot of particles in the water. And we're also testing for the impacts of eutrophication, which, remember, is runoff, and then eutrophication, which is the nutrients being added to the water, the algal bloom, the algae dying, decomposing, and then hypoxia because all of the oxygen is used up. All right, soil erosion is caused by the exposed soil on the farm from excessive grazing or removing of plants. So if the cows or the livestock or whatever are eating all of the grass, all of the organic plants, the soil will be exposed. But also when you're farming, typically you will harvest the plants all at once, and when you harvest them, you have exposed soil as well. That can lead to soil erosion, and this is from agricultural practices. The soil erosion will definitely reduce the water quality at the blue location. Typically, if there was eutrophication occurring, the eutrophication is obviously going to be majority of it will be from synthetic fertilizer use. Some of it might be from waste products from the cattle. Some of it might be from organic material from the crops, adding nutrients to the body of water. But typically it's going to be from the synthetic fertilizer use. Adding nitrate fertilizers at this farm is going to run off into a body of water, reduce the water quality. So if we have a power plant and a dam, the power plant will contribute thermal pollution. And we'll talk about this in our energy unit. But power plants are going to use water, boil the water, make the steam, turn the turbine, spin the generator, generate electricity. We use boiling water, we have to cool it down. So they have these big, massive cooling towers. If you ever seen the beginning of The Simpsons, they have that big, giant, triangular shaped tower with the smoke coming out. That doesn't necessarily mean a nuclear power plant. That just means it's a cooling tower. That's where they're cooling off the water before they add it back to where they got it from. So you don't want to add hot water because it's going to reduce the water, the oxygen, the dissolved oxygen level, and it will also could thermally shock the fish. Getting too hot too fast can kill the fish. So power plants can contribute thermal pollution, and a dam can lead to sedimentation. When I block the flow of the river here, all of the particles, all of these nutrients that are flowing downstream are going to get stuck at the dam, so you may have a buildup upstream from the dam, and that is sedimentation. All right, I gave you a lot of information. I would like you, for FRQ practice, to describe a human activity that leads to soil degradation. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope that this was informative. I will see you soon.